Hello, welcome to today's talk. Today I'm going to be covering some of the tips and tricks I've learned through working with Houdini. Other things I'll be covering is making your first PyPanel. It's one thing I haven't really seen any artists really do tutorials on or actually use. Done properly, it can be very helpful with anyone that's using your HDAs, and other things that will just simplify other artists' life when they work with your tools, and things that make it easier to integrate with anything you make. So who am I? I'm Thomas Tobin. I work at Ubisoft and I create procedural tools or different HDAs or any type of workflows to optimize an artist's creation of any type of asset. I also teach games tutorials for Houdini at the Game Art Institute online, and I previously interned at Side Effects working on games workflows, different procedural island, and a couple other things. If you want to contact me, feel free to reach out at my email, but let's start. The first thing I want to cover is creating your own PyPanel. Now, PyPanels are super useful because depending on what you want an artist to do, if they don't know Houdini and they don't know the setup very well, having your own custom PyPanel or a UI layout will allow you to let them interact with the tools as you intend and design that. So we're going to cover creating your first PyPanel. The PyPanel I've chosen is, say you have an asset on disk. We can copy it. When you grab it straight away, you have your asset inside Houdini. You've just counted all the materials on the object. You've checked, is the object centered? And then from there, you can do whatever you want with this tool. So the first step is downloading Qt Designer. Now, Qt Designer can be found online. You just have to Google Qt Designer download. And this will allow you to create your own PyPanel UI layouts. Now, the first step is first, you have to drag in, create your own layouting. There's a couple tutorials on this online, and drag in whatever buttons you need. I optimally try and lay out what I think the functionality I will do first, and then as I iterate over time, go back to this Qt Designer layout and add more buttons or change it around, see which works best. Doing it inside of the Qt Designer is also a lot more efficient because if I get a lot of artist feedback that this is not intuitive or I can't figure out how to work the tool, I can just simply rearrange my buttons or do better icons, and just it's a lot more interactive with the workflow this way. The next is the empty space in the bottom is actually a Q label. And so this Q label or Q button, depending on what you want the functionality to do, allows me to set an image, and we'll cover that in a moment. So where do you find Python panels inside Houdini? Python panels can be, if you go to the Windows tab, Python Panel Editor. This brings up a pop-up of the window and allows you to create a new interface. You can name it, label it, and give it its own custom icon. You probably want to set a new save location. And then just below is the Python script that will run any of this. Now, this is starter code I always use, and I'm not going to be running through the fundamentals of Python today, but I just want to cover, if you want your own PyPanel, this is all you need to get started. You don't necessarily need to import these libraries, but for today's tutorial, you do. For example, with import OS, I know I'm going to be working with Windows path libraries, so I import OS. Then with C types, I'm importing C types because I know that I'm going to use the Clipboard library because I want to grab whatever's from my clipboard. The next you have to declare is, where are my Python panels located? The actual root directory. And finally, you just declare a main widget. So this is my main object for the UI. I can then specify this is exactly where the file path is located for my designer file. And then from there, I can just set up the connect push buttons to event handlers. This is super interesting because all of the buttons you've created before, if you look at the object name at the top right, I've named it image center. This allows me to connect image center or push button or whatever object to a function. From there, on clicked.connect, I can link to whatever function I want. So I'm linking it to main. So when someone presses push button grab, I can call the main function straight away. From there, the main function just calls my other functions. The first step is clipboard grab. So we have to figure out first how to grab whatever's in our clipboard. The second is we need to instantiate the object inside of Houdini, and so that is creating our object. And then we check that the actual file that we just created is centered. And we finally check that the materials and count how many there are. So you can see I'm just passing back and forth the variables between each one as I'm creating objects. So the first step is Clipboard. We use the C-types library. You can Google this code. It's commonly available, so you don't have to retype it out. It's actually on my other GDC talk as well that you can find on the side effects website. And this C-types library, if you call the clipboard grab function, will just grab simply whatever's in your clipboard. From there, because I know it is a FBX, I can clean out the quotation marks, and that is done when you shift right click on a object or a file inside of Windows File Explorer and you do copy as path, you will get 2 quotation marks on either end. So the clean input will simply strip away those quotation marks. Then I check, is FBX actually in the clean input? If it's not, I find out that the object is not actually copied, and I end my function there. If it is there, and I know that if FBX is in there, it means I'm actually grabbing a proper type of file that the file node will support. And then I can just print, it's got my clipboard, let's move on. From there, I simply just check my materials. So shop path is file.geometry find prim attribute. So I'm just locating if the attribute even exists. And I can do this with the shop material path, and I declare that as an attribute that exists already. If it does exist, then list out an empty list of all materials. And so for each path inside of the strings, and shop_path.strings only gives me uniques. So I basically, in the end, get a list mats gets filled with every unique type of material. From there, I can just count the length of the list of materials, and then the findChild LCD number.display allows me to set in the number of that actual material count, as you can see in the top right. The final is check for center. Now there are many ways you can do this, but a simple way I wanted to do was just check, does the FBX translation attribute contain anything other than 0? So if everything is okay, then I can print the check. However, if all is false, and then the cross pixmap declares where is that icon I'm setting, I can then just set my pixmap. So this is my image inside of my UI file, and it will set this little icon you can see on the top right. So it'll either do a check mark or a cross mark depending on if it's true or false, if there actually is transforms on the objects. Now, I wanted to cover a couple of small tips and tricks. A lot of these I've actually sourced from the Houdini Discord, because you don't really think about these until after the fact, or you're like, hey, that's cool, I didn't know about that. But some of these I do use daily, and I think that some people should be, because they really make using other people's HDAs really simple and really easy to use. The first is icon strips. Now, icon strips are super important, and I have very rarely seen them used. Icon strips allow you to set an icon. So you can, for example, say yes or no with a check mark or a cross mark, or even have on-off states. So we have mutually exclusive, so it can either be yes or no. Or if you want to say quality settings, you can say it is low quality and high quality. So I use this a lot for exporters, for example. For an exporter, I just want the artist to say, I want low, medium, high exported. Sometimes, however, an artist may only want low, or may only want medium, or there's a bunch of different settings that they may want to turn on, off, yes, no. And so having these simple icons that they can straight away know what they're turning on and off makes it a lot easier to use your tools. So to create one, you just go to your HA parameters. There will be an icon strip on the left, drag that in, and then inside of the parameter description, in the menu section, you will have menu items. So I've created 2, and I just simply link to the file path of my textures, so my icon for tick and icon for cross, and define them as low and high. So to avoid ambiguity, as you hover over one of the images, you get the label pop up. The final thing you can set here is your toggle can be set to normal. And so this allows you to either set it as a mutually exclusive type of icon strip, so that is either yes or no, and it can't be both. Or if you have toggle, it can just say yes, no, or both. And this allows you to, while you're running all your scripts, say, is this yes and no? What type of settings is it currently set at? And define that. From there, it is color palettes. Now, depending on your project or the scale of your project, sometimes you need consistent color palettes between softwares. So if you have a very specific tone or a collision or anything that you're using to signify this is always the output in whatever DCC. And this allows any artist that is not familiar with Houdini to straight away recognize what is the nodes that are doing. If you have a custom palette or a specific color that you want to use, and for me, I always use a specific tone of blue. And this means throughout all of my tools, there will always be this tone of blue for a specific function. So if they swap into Houdini and they've never used Houdini before, and they know I need to export now, they only have to look for the blue node. So the way you access this is in the color palette. If you right click on any of the colors, you can edit it, remove it, or even save your new color palette as defaults. The next is ramps. Ramps are super useful because if you have any type of parameter that's like an animation curve or anything that you need to gradually change over time or have randomized along this curve, in Houdini 18, the little cog now has presets. The presets allow you to set a constant, and I'll go through an example. So we can say linear, we can invert that, mirror it, and really quickly have this input almost like a preset for the user. If we know that they may be swapping between these and trying to visualize the look very quickly, you want to increase their iteration time. So a lot of my nodes now, I will always have this cog if I have a ramp or something else, and have a couple presets that they can just swap between really quickly and see the results immediately. And these are things that should be integrated when you can. The next is layouting. Layouting is super important because if you want someone to join into your HDA and collaborate with you, for example, you need it to be very clean and easily readable. So one, you can lay out all. However, sometimes you'll get a mess of nodes where it doesn't know where to connect. So what you can do is, in the video shown, drag however many nodes you want, hold A, drag to the right or drag down, and that allows you to just clean up and align the nodes either to the right or down. Doing this throughout your entire project, you can have very clean and easily readable node layouts or anything. So an artist can just say, this is where this section is, and then you can see the funnel down or to the left, depending on which flow you choose. A couple of random shortcuts that I just learned recently is Control L will access the graph layout. So what I mean by this is if you're in the node network and you are 5 nodes deep and you don't know exactly what the graph path is, if you Control L, you can then, the object changes to /object and you get the exact path of the node you're currently in. This is super useful for when you're just trying to find the reference of the node you are at, or if you're trying to make a new parameter and you don't know the node. The next is middle click held. If you have a color node, for example, you can middle click over and then on the color, as you're holding middle click, go off screen, go onto any other color around. It's kind of hard to see, but just here is where I'm middle clicking. You can then source a color from anywhere else on your screen, and this allows you to sample outside of Houdini. Natively, you can only sample within, and so just having the middle click and held and going outside allows you to access other colors outside of Houdini. The next is creating your own shelf tools. So while you can create your own Python script or any other script inside of the shelf tool, which will instantiate it, if you have a setup, for example, this Voronoi cube I use all the time. I always start with the same type of layout and I don't want to create my own layout or custom button for it. If you just create your geometry network, for example, drag that onto the shelf tool, straight away you have your shelf tool created. We can delete our source, and now when you click inside of Houdini, you again get that new node layout exactly as a preset that you've saved before. One thing that really saves me now that I'm coding a lot more is the external editor. If you go to the cgtoolbox.com and you go to the link down below, you can download a plugin that allows you, when you right click or Alt-E inside of any type of expression, so a Vex expression, a Python wrangle, or anything else, even a Python panel script, then when you hit Alt-E, you can edit that inside of an external editor having the power of a full IDE. Then inside of Visual Studio Code, for example, if you go to the extension marketplace, you can install the Vex library or any other auto library that will auto predict or give you the actual auto completion while you're coding. Another really useful plugin I use is Kite, or also 9tab, and that allows you to have predictive code as you type. So if I'm always typing if blah 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 do this, the next time I type if, it's going to give me the auto completion of if blah 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 do this, and I don't have to retype that. So you end up just typing 2 letters, hitting tab very frequently because the prediction is very good. The next tool from the same site is Easy Compile Block. When I first started, I didn't really necessarily know how to properly compile my for loops. While one, you can only compile a for loop on compile safe nodes, you also need to make sure that you're referencing the correct spare parameters and you're not referencing outside of the for loop. However, it's possible if you do it in the proper setup. Now, if you again go to the CG Toolbox website, there's an Easy Compile Block tool, which adds a new UI menu, and from here it will, I believe I have a picture, do not. If you click on the compile for loop, will automatically encapsulate all the nodes, retarget all the parameters, and then from there you have your own compiled for loop. And you don't have to think about how do I do this properly, it will just go through if possible and do it for you. The next interesting thing I have very rarely seen is the parameter spreadsheet. Now when I first looked at this tool, I thought it was broken because nothing would show up. So if you go to the parameter spreadsheet, then we go object and you select one of your objects. For example, if we want to select all of the boxes in the scene, and I have 2 boxes here, I can do a star, giving me the mask, and then I just have to filter by what node am I searching by. So I'm searching by color, and I know both of these objects have a color node. If I want to set both of these nodes to the exact same values, then I can just drag them both and select and set them to both the same value. So just go back to that. If you see on the top left, the up mask, this is the objects you're selecting. You can group select them, or for example, just having the same path and doing the star, and that will give us a fuzzy search over all the boxes. So if you have 5,000 objects, for example, and you wanted to edit one single node inside of those, that they all have. For example, if you have your file paths all set to the D drive, but now you want to set all of your file paths to the E drive, you can just go to your parameter spreadsheet, edit that through, and fix them all at once and batch edit that. The next is scene data reference. This is something that's super useful that I didn't know about, and I use it a lot now. If you don't remember how to reference another object outside of the actual path, and you don't want to go all the way back up to the node, right-click, copy parameter, this is a method to fix that. When you right-click, you go to Reference, you go to your scene data, and now you can access any other nodes inside the scene with their parameters, their transforms, anything on them, any attribute, and you just have to target them, and it will fill out every other field connected. So this is super useful because if I don't want to go into another network and try and go and find that specific node, sometimes you're 500 nodes deep, that now I can just go search within the scene data, find the node immediately, and reference it in. The next thing I recommend is building shortcuts into your tools if possible. One thing I've been starting to do now recently is have mixing my PyPanel toolsets with my HDAs. I will have a PyPanel that pops up when the HDA is created, and it will have a couple shortcuts. So for example, a clean up nodes, a compile me, or find objects. And this allows me to do functionality such as the easy compile loop, and someone that doesn't necessarily know Houdini can just automatically click on the shortcut. They don't actually have to know the associated actions it's doing, but it is just like an easy hint or an easy like tool set that's right there for them if they don't know Houdini very well. The next is building these types of actions into your HDAs. So this is a character tool I've been working on recently. The first is you want a user to be able to set presets. So if they have any key inputs or any of the settings down below, you want them to be able to type a name, hit record preset, and then this is added into the preset list of low, medium, high, or custom, for example. This then, if they have a character set up for a small character or this type of male character, woman character that you always want to do on those specific setup, say if you have a poly reduction on hair, you could have the preset named hair, and then you could have preset hair low and have a very specific setup. From there, using a strip of buttons, again, you can have these same type of auto hotkeys or shortcuts built into your HDA. So your frame object could frame the object inside of the viewport. The user does not necessarily need to know that space F is what action you're calling, but you're just adding this functionality into your tool so someone doesn't have to relearn Houdini and know how to use Houdini natively. They can just get going in your tool straight away. Finally, again, drop-down menus, super useful. So type of character, being able to specify, is it a small character, medium, long, is it a operator, what type of operator is it, and having that functionality there. And having these drop-down menus being populated by the user is super useful. The final thing I think is very useful is the RGB strip. This allows when you're actually doing your export process to say I only want which channel being associated. Again, you can just have red, green, blue. However, if you hit the button on the left hand side, it toggles on and off multiple buttons all at the same time. And this is just simplifying the life of the actual user of your tool. You're allowing someone to use a Houdini tool without ever knowing Houdini. They just have to stay within your single PyPanel or your single HDA and just use that tool. They don't need to learn any of the intricacies of Houdini along the way. If you get any takeaways from my talk today, the first I think is really important is just simplifying all actions. I think any type of HDA interaction or any type of interaction with the user should be simplified where possible. For example, if you can give them the ability to just press buttons instead of learning hotkeys, that might be useful. If you can also simplify the having icons or having images constantly throughout your HDAs, it will allow someone to integrate into your toolset a lot easier. The next is, can you automate some of these processes? So if you have a button on screen that, for example, the export process, you want the export process to be a single button, because then the user doesn't have any mistakes along the way. They don't accidentally turn on export in ASCII, or they have not turning on animation. If it's a character, have a button that simply does one feature and is made for them. And the next is just have fun and experiment. A lot of these tools, you don't have to use every single thing. For example, the color palettes may not be necessary for everyone, but it's just a fun thing that you can figure out as you're learning through Houdini. I like to just slot some of these in just so I'm staying up to date with, if I have a huge HDA, I want the interaction to be as fun and easy as possible. So a lot of the time I'll just have an icon strip or something that lightens up the actual interaction of, instead of just a bunch of sliders or a bunch of things that they just have to type in a manual number. If you can create that actual interaction super easy, people will be more likely to stay with your tools. Again, for learning material, feel free to look at the Houdini documentation. There's a lot of good information on there. The next, if you're wanting to look at Python and explore that further, I recommend this GitHub for learning some Python snippets, and it covers examples of this is how you instantiate an asset, or this is how you reference an attribute. The next is Joy of Vex on Tokuru. If you want to learn Vex, or the programming language inside of Houdini, I would really look at going through the day-to-day tasks and trying to figure out what you can use these for. Finally, check out the Game Art Institute online. I'll be having a Houdini course coming out soon covering some game workflows and how you can create your first digital asset and how you can actually integrate this into a bigger pipeline. Again, we're hiring at Ubisoft. feel free to apply below. There's often Houdini positions coming up very frequently, and we hire technical artists all the time. Thank you so much, and feel free to follow me on any of these sites. Have a great day.